to have pubs from CLP Innovation to share his views about sustainability in Hong Kong and especially about smart building. So Pub, thanks a lot for joining us. And can you introduce yourself and also your company?
Yeah, sure. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me here. So I'm from CLP Innovation. So as many of you know, CLP is very much a big part of Hong Kong. We were founded in 1901, but actually CLP has a broader presence as well. We've got quite a large presence in India, China, as well as Australia. So in those regions, in India and China, we've got a lot of renewable assets, and then in Australia, we have generation as well as a retail arm. So overall, service about 5 million customers. Where I specifically work is under CLP Innovation on an area called Smart Energy Connect. And our goal is to help with energy management solutions. And one of the areas that I focus on is smart buildings, but we'll get more into that shortly.
Good, thank you. So the goal of your company is to help people to save electricity. Okay, but it's very interesting, right? So your mother company business is benefit from people spend more money on electricity, but you are the guy to help people to spend less money in electricity. So how to reconcile that?
It's a very, very fair question. Our core business, everyone knows, is CLP Power. If we talk about Hong Kong as an example, yes, it's about electricity supply. And we're very, very proud about our electricity supply and the reliability. It's one of the most reliable and, in fact, one of the most affordable in the world. But that's just one part of the equation. It's providing electricity to those that need it. But we need to go further. We need to also help our customers use our product most effectively. And you mentioned the topic about sustainability earlier. And one of the areas about sustainability is shouldn't have any wastage. You should use what you need. And energy management is really about that. So how does that reconcile with the core business where the sales are dependent on electricity? Well, the thing is that we want to make sure that we can help our customers save energy and use that right amount. Because when we do that, we build longer and more sustainable relationships with our customers. And let's face it, if we don't help our customers do that, our customers are going to work with others in doing those things. But we're experts in energy, and we've had energy running through our blood for quite a long time, decades and decades, more than a century. So it makes a lot of sense for us to do that for our customers. And we've had lots of such examples of working with our customers doing that, whether that's in the commercial sector or in the industrial sector.
Yeah, so CLP and Power embrace the sustainability mindset in their corporate culture, right? So it's very long-term strategy. In one hand, they make money from electricity consumption, and on the other hand, they want to ensure that it's good for the society, good for the world, okay? And people are using electricity in the most effective way. Am I correct?
That's right. That's right. We want to make sure that people are using our product as well as possible. And you're right. We have a very, very long-term view of our investments. I think the other consideration is that although we do supply energy for our customers as part of our core activities, we also make sure that we have incentives for our customers to use the right amount. And we've had ranges of programs over the years for doing that. So if I talk about the core business, one of the things that we started to launch more than a year ago is deployment of smart meters. So traditionally, whenever a customer would get their electricity bill, they would see how much energy that was used over that 2-month period for a residential customer, and then they would understand what the bill is. But that's about all you can understand. You can't really tell when you use the most. You can't really compare that to the weather, for example. So during the summer periods, if you had an air conditioner that was not very efficient, then what do you do? How do you act? So when we installed smart meters, you get a much richer set of information about your energy usage. You know half an hour by half an hour how much usage there is. There's in fact a mobile app that CLP Power launched where you can get alerts on energy usage. Now, that's one part of that where you get richer information. With that information, you can help manage that energy. The second part also is another program which we trialed, in fact, a few years ago and is going to again launch this year, is something called demand response. It's a very technical term, but what that means is when there is a peak amount of energy that's required, then CLP Power will incentivize customers to reduce using that energy. Don't use so much. If you can, turn off an air conditioner, turn off appliances if it's not necessary. That actually makes quite a lot of sense for all parties. Because suppose that everyone did use all that energy at once, then what does CLP Power or other utilities need to do? They need to have bigger power plants. Those bigger power plants are just there just for those peak periods. So that's another example how we're trying to use combinations of technology and that mindset of using the right amount in order to help everyone and help society as a whole.
So, okay, we are going to the topic about smart building. Okay, so based on our research, we know that 90% of electricity consumption is from buildings.
Right.
Okay, both residential and also commercial, including offices and retail, shopping malls. So how can it be so high percentage, 90%? Right. What are the insights from that?
Yeah, it is very high. If you look at globally, average is around 30 to 40%. So Hong Kong is very, very high. But we're a very service-based industry. More than half the population lives above the 15th floor. So, and you consider about the density of Hong Kong and the fact there isn't so much manufacturing or industrial compared to other countries, it kind of gives you a bit of an insight as to why it's so high. The other aspect I think you can consider is about our behavior and our tendency of managing comfort. I think we've all experienced being in really, really cold buildings. And we do sometimes overcool our buildings at times as well. And I think that's also quite a key factor in that. In fact, in our buildings, about 60 to 70% of the energy consumption is just on the cooling.
Oh, air conditioning.
Correct.
Okay, so summertime, the business of CLP Power in summertime maybe double of in wintertime.
Not just
double.
Not just on CLP Power, in any utilities around the Asia Pac, then summertime there is a large cooling load. The interesting thing is that there's an opportunity there, because that example of the building that's too cold, that's an opportunity to save some energy. And that's where an exciting area that I work in, because I want to help businesses to make sure they use just that right amount. So one of the things that on commercial buildings generally, there is a piece of equipment that some of our audience we're very much versed with, which is called a building management system. So this is a system that would connect with the centralized cooling system, sometimes the lighting, sometimes the lifts. This is a system that our facilities managers use to control the environment. And I choose that word carefully, control, but not necessarily to optimize. So one of the R&D work that we did was, well, how can you leverage that system, the existing sensors in a building, to optimize the environment? And we did that with one of our buildings. So in Shafshupo, we have a building which is about 65 years old, built at a time where sustainability was not top of mind. And that building, what we did was we put this analytic solution there, which sits on top of the building management system, gets all the data points, and gets a heartbeat of the system in real time to understand where the wastage opportunities are, where some of the equipment is not running so optimally. And then we actually provide insights to facility managers to tell them, these are areas where you're going to be wasting energy, or these are areas where it's overcooled or undercooled, and there's health indexes that we give to equipment. So it's almost like a virtual doctor. These are, it's a great example of using technology and data and insights to make this 60-year-old building smarter. And that helps arm the facility managers to just focus their efforts on areas where they can optimize spaces like that.
So So you help those management company or those landlord. Who are you working with?
We work with a range of companies, a range of stakeholders, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the areas is a facility manager. So for a facility manager, it depends on building to building, company to company, but they typically have an energy saving target. Sometimes it ranges from 1% to 5%. Other stakeholders we have is building owners. Because sometimes the contractual arrangement that you may have with your property manager, maybe there isn't incentives for energy saving. But for a building owner, it's absolutely a demand and a business case to save energy. And now going forward, there's also sustainability benefits of being greener as well. And those examples of having the KPI that typically facility managers have of those 1 to 5%. In the old days, what you could do is switch from traditional lighting to LED lighting. All that low-hanging fruit has been done in many ways. But what do you do next? And this is where we focus a lot of time on different types of smart technologies to help get that optimization.
So we talk about smart building, but and in smart building, I think energy is one of the elements. It's big.
Yeah.
So besides of energy management, do you also provide solution for other features?
Absolutely. One of the other areas is around this tenant environment, the space itself. So the examples I gave earlier was more on the central cooling system, but what about in an office environment? And that's very relevant, not just for the building owner, but a lot of commercial buildings. It's the team that rents a floor doesn't necessarily have impact on the cooling environment. So one of the areas that we focused on is how do we help office managers or large offices save energy? So one of the sets of solutions that we did a lot of R&D with and that we offer to our customers now as well is on a smart office solution. So what we put together is a range of IoT devices, so things like occupancy sensors, smart lighting, in fact, a direct connection to split air conditioners if you've got local cooling needs, or even smart appliances, so that we manage that environment, firstly to save energy so that you just turn on equipment when people are present, or also to improve on productivity side. Productivity side is kind of interesting because when we talk to office managers, they don't just care about energy, they care about providing a good environment for the staff there. So one of the areas that we added was a booking system. So it doesn't necessarily tie with energy, but there is an indirect relationship, because if you think about meeting rooms, space is very precious in Hong Kong, and a lot of corporates, they have meeting rooms which are underutilized, and rent is expensive. So that helps our customers solve a need of having a booking system that optimizes that space and gives you data analytics of how much usage there is. When is the optimal time space are used? But indirectly, what we use that as well is to help with pre-cooling. So before the meeting happens, then we can send signals to pre-cool that environment or turn on the appliances at that time. So there's a win-win situation. You get a good experience, productivity, plus there's an energy efficiency aspect as well. So it's one of the ways that we thought about an indirect way of providing that benefit. The other one example I can further add is on air quality. Air quality is certainly top of mind for a lot of people, and more as people become a lot more conscious about the environment. Air quality is quite helpful as an indicator, and I think now with COVID, I think people understanding what the pollutants in the air is really important. So there's a feel-good or information factor for tenants there, but it also gives you an idea of what kind of cooling requirements are also, again, that helps with the energy efficiency aspect as well.
So it seems you also have some very good solution related to my industry, right?
We should talk afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, so talking about my industry, we see that because of the COVID, it seems there is a big trend about work from home or remote work. So you see that in the last 1 or 2 months, there are several big banks. They already announced that even after COVID, okay, they still want to encourage people work remotely. So how do you see this trend benefit your company?
You know, I was looking at the aggregate energy profile for all of Hong Kong this year. So if you look at this data about how much energy is used, of course summer is a peak period, but there are mini peaks as well. And one of the things we did was we overlaid the energy profile with the number of COVID cases. So one of the interesting things we saw was in March, April, when it was quite a panic period where everyone was rushing home, energy usage within buildings was still quite high. It took more than a month before that energy profile went down, which is quite surprising when you think about it. It's like, why is there still so much energy when everyone's at home? I think one of the things that we also realize when we engage a lot of our customers is that there is a lot of manual management of buildings. So, and we see this not just during COVID, but during other periods as well. So in previous years, to give another example, during typhoons, the energy usage is still high even though people are at home. And it's because this approach of having pre-settings for cooling requirements. One of the solutions that we have as well is to automatically optimize a chiller based on the ambient temperature. Because it's quite expensive to have a facility management team to be setting the chillers manually every single day. But nowadays you can use technology to do that. You should be able to automate those kind of things. So I think if we have this case of more and more companies working from home, it's not going to be a 1-0 relationship. It's not a case where everyone works from home all the time. Some companies have this mixed arrangement where it's split teams, or maybe it's once a week you go home. So that it causes some challenges to facility teams on how do you optimize cooling when there is fluctuation of the cooling needs. And that's where technology can really, really help. So I think it's actually a really good opportunity for us to help automate this, and then you get the benefit of energy efficiency, and then also there's an impact of reducing the carbon footprint too.
So it seems that it's a high demand for both the facility manager and also the landlord or company to look into how to better manage their energy consumption to save their costs, right? But what are the challenges for you to promote this? It seems very logical and very simple, right? What are the challenges? Why people are still sleeping there?
Let me go back to more than 100 years ago.
100 years, okay.
More than 100 years ago, there
World
was...
War
I. Sorry, even further than that. In the late 1800s, that was a time when we had lots of steam factories. So everything was run by steam. There was a big steam turbine, and all the factory workers would run in unison with the steam turbine. So there was lots and lots of tables there, and the speed of the workers was based on the speed of the turbine. There was this interesting and amazing technology that came up called electricity. So what you should have is a big motor, electricity run motor, that could help save a lot of things. It was cheaper, it was more optimal, but there wasn't any of the productivity gains that happened. And the reason was that a lot of factory owners would just rip out the steam engine and then replace it with a motor there. The turbine, the shaft was still there, and everyone still ran at the case of the shaft itself. What needed to happen was over 50 years or so, there was a rethinking of using this technology. So instead, we got rid of the turbine, and then we had motors in each of the factory desks. And then it was a new way of thinking about it. You could run how quickly each of the workers worked. That took a long time, and it took a bit of a mind shift. And it was the same kind of thing in the 1980s when PCs took off. It was supposed to be a revolution, but it took 20, 30 years for everyone to really adopt computers. So all these technology is fantastic in that you get insights, but then there needs to be a shift in the way that you think about it. That's really challenging for buildings because with buildings, there's a lot of legacy there. You can't just tear down a building and redesign it. If you could redesign it, then it's fantastic because you can embed these technologies. But then we've got 40,000 buildings in Hong Kong that have been here for quite some time, and then there's lots of operations that have been here for quite some time as well. One example I can share with is that this analytics solution that I talked about earlier, it gives great insight as to where the problems are within a building. But unless you can use that insight and act on it, you actually don't get the savings. So a lot of the cases we can get potential savings of 10% for just the analytics solution, but unless the FM team acts and they're incentivized to do so, you don't get that. We find when we meet a lot of teams out there, there is still some legacy activity. So there's no workflow systems, there's a whiteboard with markers on what to do for the day. So I think one of the big challenges is having a mind shift. And I believe that it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time for that cultural shift, because there needs to be the right incentives, the right support, the right training to go through that journey and that change. Our facility managers, they are overworked, they're understaffed, so there needs to be a bit of a time for that transition to happen.
So you truly believe that, okay, it will happen, but it takes time, right? And do you think COVID, the pandemic, is something happened, is speed up this trend, or is irrelevant?
I think all of us have seen this meme on LinkedIn about how COVID has accelerated digital transformation.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Just like Zoom, okay, the technology has been there for so long, right? But now people are forced to learn how to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's COVID has certainly accelerated the questions we get about how can we optimize our environment? How do we manage our environments remotely? The technology has been there for quite some time, but now it's like people are looking at it with a different lens. And that's the point about your question earlier about the challenge. It's that mind shift has been forced to change.
Yeah.
So I think it is a really interesting opportunity for people to look at this and use this as a way to think differently, but not just to solve some of the problems that we're having now. I think these decisions that we make and the planning we make can really help us longer term. We need to go and manage our environments remotely. We need to automate our environments. And that's really what smart buildings are about. It's about using technology, data insights to automate the environment. And when you automate things, you don't rely on people to do manual settings, to manual set the environments. You use technology to do these.
Okay, so you mentioned about building consume 90% of electricity, and air conditioning accounts for 60 to 70% of the electricity. Okay, I used to travel between Hong Kong and China, and I know that China government, they restrict the air conditioning should not be lower than 23 degrees Celsius. Am I correct? So, okay, I don't know if you can comment about the role of Hong Kong government in terms of these.
There is recommendations on air conditioner settings. We have it in fact in our office. In our head office, we've got next to the thermostat, there's stickers everywhere that says, please put your temperature between 24 to 26 degrees. And then the thermostat itself, what's the setting? It's at 18 degrees, so it's at 20 degrees. And I think it's a case of comfort versus, I think, the greater good. Some offices are better than others, but I think it's a case of relying on behaviors. People tend to be a bit lazy, people tend to be a bit short-term. I'm absolutely guilty of that. I think instead of relying on people, why not rely on processes or automation to help with those? One of the things that we're deploying in one of our offices is to automate the thermostat itself. So based on the temperature within the office, then adjust the thermostat automatically, but don't necessarily exclude what people prefer. Because I think there are cases where environments might be too cold or too hot. So what we've done is also included a mobile app where people can put in their recommendations. And that also feeds into a machine learning model which will adjust those temperatures automatically. So that's a case where you get automation there, but don't disregard what the preferences are from people. But you don't just purely rely on people's and recommendations of those temperature settings. There needs to be a mix of all of these things in order to find the right balance.
So I try to remember something in what happened when I worked in a central office about 10 years ago. I remember I had a colleague. He used to be very sensitive to the temperature.
Right.
Okay. So it seems a culture. So for example, you have 10 people working in the same office.
Right.
Always the person lowest temperature wins, okay?
Right.
Because he or she can ask other people to wear a jacket.
Right.
But, okay, so, so what do you think about this culture? Is it unique in Hong Kong or very common?
I've experienced that myself in several companies. I think it's, there might be, I think that there is that culture wherever you go. In some other countries, though, I think there is a bit more acceptance of things like fans instead of air conditioning. But I think, especially here in Hong Kong, air conditioning is really, really important. That case of having individuals that feel colder than others, I think what's missing there is that one person feels really cold, but then the 9 others do not. But that information is trapped in that little tribe there. It doesn't get fed back to the facility management team. It doesn't get fed back to the air conditioning. So that information gets trapped there. And what happens? All of those 10 complain. 9 are too hot, 1 is too cold. That information, it's a lost opportunity, because what tends to happen is during the monthly reviews or the meetings, everyone just complains saying, oh, the building is way too cold. I think there's an opportunity there where we should put in processes to get that feedback. Even if you don't make that a smart office, it's make sure you get that feedback in so that the facility management team can perhaps do some manual adjustments. That person that's really cold and sitting there, maybe they have a fan core unit above that. They can just put some plastic covers there to go and redirect that there. That's a very low-cost solution, but it's getting that feedback in is really important so you can act on that. Okay,
so we know that going smart, saving energy, okay, is a big trend. But we also see that there is an inertia of, of making change. So can you share with us, is there any urgency, okay, for people to do that, okay? And if they don't do that now, what are their downsides?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the trends that we've seen over the years is that when we first spoke to property managers or facility management teams, and we shared with them about these technologies around we can automate a building, I think one of the things that we saw was, okay, that sounds a bit risky. Please don't touch my chillers. We don't want to give you control. And that's why we started with this virtual doctor solution. So it's a solution called Building Scope that can provide that insight and analytics. That helped with the facility managers. But then now, much more recently, we're seeing that FM teams are much more open to have automation and have these solutions that automatically optimize the chillers directly. And one such solution we deployed was, again, in one of our really old properties. It's a hardware solution that connects to the chiller and will adjust the chiller to the point where we can save a tremendous amount of energy. So this one building, we managed to save about 25% energy. And if you think about it, the average energy saving target for a lot of properties is 1%. So 25% is huge. Now, the reason that we saw that shift where there was an acceptance, it was multiple. One was, I think there is a lot more awareness of being energy conscious. There is a big pull, some from the sustainability teams, from large MNCs, so just the large awareness of environmental factors. More recently, our government announced that we should be carbon neutral by 2050. Like, those are the kind of things and the conversations that are making people a lot more aware and conscious for this. We've always had things like building energy codes that recommended or stipulated what the settings are. One such example is that for any new building, you should have a smart lighting solution. But with these external factors and much more consciousness about sustainability and global warming, there is going to be more and more of this shift. So I see this as an inevitability. It's, do you start now or do you wait for the regulations to be tighter? I think the smarter move is to start now, because it doesn't happen overnight. You need to go through that journey.
So do you have any data about what are the range of return of investment? So we all know that we need to make some investment in terms of those technology, equipments. So do you have any reference about the return of investment?
Yeah, so maybe I can also share a little bit about how we think about a lot of these technologies. A lot of these solutions, we spend a lot of time in researching, analyzing, and running them ourselves. So for any technology that we deploy to our customers, we run them in our own buildings. So that we
already proved the concept.
We prove the concept, and it doesn't matter even if it's successful overseas. We need to see it working in a Hong Kong context, and we want to really validate. How do you get it installed? What are the value propositions? What do our facility managers in our CLP properties think about them? And what is that return? What we aim for is at least a return within a 3-year period, maximum 5 years. But some of the solutions I spoke about, we get returns within 1 to 2 years. So those are fantastic business cases. And those kind of metrics are really important, so that it helps a little bit easier for customers to go and make that case internally.
So it pays back in 3 to 5 years.
Correct.
So it's a very good return, and it's well validated by your own buildings, right? So do you work with those banks or finance company? And in fact, your client, they don't need to spend their own money. They just borrow from banks, and then the savings, we pay the loan. Do you do that?
It's certainly a possibility. What we do at the moment is that we directly make the case for our customers, and then they can make that investment, and they've got the data behind us to see that payback period. I think there is certainly opportunities for us to look at other models where we can have these financing arrangements, and those kind of things, they really work for solutions where we have these automation. So that example of the chiller optimization solution, where there is this technology that's controlling the chiller, it's much easier to make that case. Need to be aware that for other solutions where it's more data and insights, there is a potential saving, but then you need the facility managers to go and act on it in order to realize that. So you need to just be conscious about the types of solutions that are there.
So we talk about the upside of smart building, and we talk about we need to do sooner instead of later. Okay. Any downside for going smart? So for example, okay, you need to go smart through digitalization. So any downside, for example, about cyber security, anything?
I think cybersecurity skill sets. I think that there's also a little bit of a mind shift, which we spoke about. On the cybersecurity side, it is something that everyone needs to be concerned about. I think it also is something that also is a little bit of a transition. I think sometimes when we talk about some of our solutions, Some of our solutions run on the cloud and some of them run locally. The cloud solutions, the natural question we get from our customers is, oh, that sounds insecure. We want to make sure everything is running in our data center. That's possible, but then there are also cost implications that are there and also some downsides to that as well, because you don't get the automatic updates to these solutions. So with cybersecurity, what we do is, as part of that R&D process, we get an external to run penetration tests so that we're also comfortable that these are solid and secure solutions. But when I say secure, nothing is 100% secure. There is always that risk. Even if even if there was a technological barriers that are there, if someone misplaces a password, there's not much you can do there. One of the other things I think every company needs to do is make sure that they have those cybersecurity processes. They've got an information security policy. If incidents do happen, then you can act on those incidents and make sure you can have those mitigations. Mm-hmm. So as part of when we go and explain a lot of these solutions, we sometimes engage with the cybersecurity teams to explain what mitigations we've gone through and how all of these.
So your company also provides cybersecurity services? We
don't provide cybersecurity services.
But you have partners?
What we do is we assess each of our solutions by a third-party cybersecurity company on the product itself. But for a building manager, they need to rely on their existing cybersecurity processes there so that it fits in nicely.
So do you think the concern about cybersecurity or the inadequate knowledge about this is one of the obstacles you are facing?
Back in 2000, when I love going back in history, back in 2000 when e-commerce was becoming a big thing, I think all of us were very concerned about using our credit card online. You know, some people went with second credit cards. They were really nervous about PayPal.
I still do that.
We had Cyber Monday, and I think there was $10 billion spent just in the US alone. I'm not sure how many were with Alibaba, but there is so much that's spent online, and it's the fact that people's acceptance of the convenience is certainly there and the benefits, but then also there's been technological improvements as well. Sometimes, like I'm sure when you've gone traveling, you would have got a notification from the bank to say, oh, why are you doing a transaction in this country?
Yeah.
So there is a growth of all of these things which help, again, minimize the risk, but not necessarily eliminate. I think there needs to be just regular diligence on all these sides.
Yeah. And about this, I didn't reply, and then my credit card being frozen. Okay, so you mentioned about carbon emission, carbon neutral, right? Can you tell me more? What is carbon neutral?
Yeah, sure. So sustainability is a really important part about CLP's CLP as a whole. So more than 10 years ago, we put together what we call the 2050 vision, and what we wanted to do was really think about the impact of our business. And one of the commitments that we made is that we're going to reduce our carbon intensity by 2050. So I think at that time we were at 0.8 kilograms of carbon per kilowatt hour, and then by 2050 it's going to be 0.15. It's really a core part of our business, and that's as a group. About more than a year ago, we also made a commitment not to invest in any new coal-fired power plants. So those are kind of some of the areas that are really impactful for our core business itself. But what we also want to do is help our customers with their decarbonization journey. And that's why smart building is so important for us as well. Putting aside the commercial benefits and the fact that it's the right thing to do, it is also part about how sustainability is really important for us as a company, but also how we feel it's really important for our customers as well. With being carbon neutral, I think there are many strategies that corporations can go through. One is adopting renewable energy. So a couple of years ago, both the electricity companies in Hong Kong started to offer feed-in tariffs. So if you put a solar panel on top of your roof, then you can get a rebate from either electricity company. That's one way of doing that, but there's limited space in Hong Kong. We can't have large solar farms.
Can all the rooftop do that?
Not everywhere. Some of the challenges is that this building, there is much taller buildings next to this one, so shading is a challenge.
Okay.
Space is a challenge. Sometimes the roofs are just not strong enough because they weren't built at a time where there was an expectation that you would have more heavy infrastructure there. And sometimes I think there are installations which aren't the safest. So I think those kind of things are strategies that people can take. The other part that you can take is obviously energy management, so making sure that you have reduced your usage. And then the third strategy that companies can take is offsets, which is another area that we focus on innovation. So CLP has renewable assets in China and India. And what we do is we take these offsets and then offer them to our customers, what we call carbon credits. So what you can't eliminate, what you can't reduce, then you can offset that as well. And that's a third strategy that companies can take as part of their decarbonization.
What are the ways to offset?
So what
Having more plants?
So what we do is our wind farms, there's really two aspects to the wind farm. There is the electricity that gets generated, but then there's also the green attribute, because you generated that electricity through that wind farm instead of using a non-green option. You would have used maybe a carbon emitting option. So that gets captured into a certificate. We get it audited by a third party, and we also get it registered in the UNFCCC, for example. So what customers can do is, if they have a carbon impacting activity, they can take that offset to offset that activity itself. So what we call a carbon credit. And it's a practice across the world. And what we do is we sell these in units of 1 ton of carbon that was avoided. And this is one way that customers can do this. I think just recently in the news, we had cases of where we helped the maritime industry. So these maritime companies that use carbon offsets to counteract the carbon emitting activities that are part of their day-to-day business activities.
Yeah, so it seems that globally, especially in Europe, people, even in investment world, they are very aware of environmental sustainability. Yeah. So even though they restrict themselves, they are not investing in those companies, they are not environmental friendly, or they don't have the sustainability strategy. So how do you compare Hong Kong with Europe?
I think it's already happening. Where when we have some informal discussions with some financial institutes, these requirements for investments to have green considerations are there. They're getting more and more. We had one such customer that was quite interested in carbon offsets, but also energy efficiency for their building, because there was a benefit of supporting the considerations of the financial institute that was supporting their business. So it's actually a great start, and we've also seen other frameworks from other banks that for certain funds, then there needs to be a portion of their investment that's not going to be, or portion of the activities for the business that's not emitting. So I think it is happening, certainly a lot more in Europe, but we see it is going to be the trend. And I think with recent developments within Asia and a lot more countries committing to be carbon neutral, it's just going to happen more and more. People are going to be more conscious about where their dollars are going to be going.
Okay, so I'm thinking, in fact, finance industry could play a very big role, right? So we all know that real estate industry, one of the beauty of it for those investors is high leverage, and especially in this era of low interest rate, right? Through the leverage, you have higher return on equity. So if all banks, okay, they require their borrower to have this smart solution in terms of sustainability, otherwise I don't give you the money. So it will force all real estate landlord, they are trying to assess all the options, right? Why the government are not forcing those, or those big banks, they are not doing that?
Problem solved. I think you resolved the issue about
right?
smart buildings in Hong Kong. I think a lot of these policies have many such dimensions. It would be great from one aspect to do that, but if we think about the 40,000 buildings that are in Hong Kong, they were designed at a time where this wasn't top of mind. So retrofitting needs to happen, and sometimes retrofitting for certain buildings can be a bit expensive. So you asked a question about payback period. If, for example, you wanted to understand the energy profile of a particular floor, you may need to install energy meters. For some buildings, it's much easier than others just because of the wiring. So that legacy challenge is always there. So I think it's going to take some time. As buildings go through renovations, through retrofitting, it's not something that can happen overnight. One of the most, if I can digress slightly, one of the most famous smart buildings in the world is one called the Edge in Amsterdam. It's about 40,000 square meters. The building was constructed where it takes the best opportunity of sunlight harvesting. There's solar panels on the south side. The way that people experience a building is that you have a mobile app and you're told where to sit based on your schedule, so you can optimize where you travel within the building, and also it knows what type of car you have, so where to park. Like, it's a fantastic experience, and it actually generates more energy than it consumes. It's an amazing story, but the reason that you could come up with that was because it was designed that way from day one. And we can't go and rip out all our buildings and then transform into these. So we need to deal with our existing building infrastructure. And that's really what the challenge is. It's how do you transition that? And that's why a lot of these carbon neutral pledges, they take 30, 40, 50 years. So,
so you mentioned about Hong Kong set the target about carbon neutral by 2050. Do you think this target realistic?
I think there's going to be, is it realistic? It's very difficult to answer.
Very difficult.
Very difficult to answer, I would say.
Very difficult to answer, but not very difficult to achieve.
I would really hope it can happen earlier. I've got 2 young kids, right? It's 4-year-old and 7-year-old. At that time, my kids are going to be in their 30s and 40s. So they're going to be starting their own family at that time.
You are becoming grandfather.
Exactly. You know, I had a good run here. I want to make sure that they do and their kids do as well. I think it's on all of us to try and do our part to make it happen a lot earlier, in fact. But there's no silver bullet. Like, it's not trying. There needs to be so many different things that needs to happen. There needs to be more electrification of cars. Of course, the electricity companies need to change their fuel mix. In CLP, we still have coal-fired power plants. There's also, as consumers, we also need to be conscious of our decisions. I think a lot of people know that if you eat meat, then there's an impact to the environment as well. So how do you manage these? And there are slowly technological improvements, like there's a good option for, instead of having meat, Beyond Meat. That's just one example. Smart building technologies are also there. So I think both the private sector and the government need to go and invest in time and money and also behavior change so that all of our kids can have a better generation.
Yeah, so it's very important that we can achieve that, right?
Yeah.
But it's challenging.
It's challenging.
Yeah, so who are the major stakeholders to drive these success?
I think, like I said, there needs to be absolutely consciousness from consumers, certainly on infrastructure. So electricity companies, for example, transportation is also an impact. Property is a big area. I mean, 90% of electricity comes from buildings, as you said. So there needs to be part of all of those, but I think also from government as well, there needs to be the right modeling and the incentives. Because I personally believe that like a lot of behavior is driven by incentives. So how do you set the right incentives so you can achieve that? And that could be certain rewards, tax incentives, there could be other benefits that you have. So I think how do you model that in the right way is really important.
So do you think government is the most important role if you are talking about the incentives?
I think government, but then also I think there's also a part to play on private sector as well. So I think it's both, and also consumer consciousness. My kids, like for example, they know what solar panels are, and it's not just because I'm in the electricity business. It's because they understand the benefits of these, and they understand the concept of recycling. So those are kind of small shifts that happen. Like when I was a kid, I had no idea what recycling was. When you drink from a plastic bottle, you throw it in the bin. So these kind of things, they all are factors in order for us to hit that target, or hopefully hit that target a bit earlier.
So I want to clarify my understanding about sustainability. So in my understanding, the consumption of electricity is not a problem itself. Okay, so for example, the electric car, people perceive it as more sustainable instead of those using petrol. But the key is about the source of electricity, right? So if you burn coal to generate electricity, it's not good for the environment. But if you use solar panel to do that, it's sustainable. So we talk a lot about the consumption of electricity, but how about the source of generation on electricity?
Yeah, and that's a fair point. It's complex in Hong Kong, globally as well. There's really three areas that, for example, in CLP that we focus on. So one is obviously emission, price, and then also reliability. So to balance all those three things, it's really it's not an easy task. So to switch from coal to renewable overnight would be fantastic, but it's practically not going to happen right now.
How many percentage of the electricity from coal in CLP?
Actually, I don't have that number off the top of my head. It's I think it's less than 50 now, if I remember correctly. But it's the details on our website. In fact, we're switching more and more from coal to gas. We had this public referendum a little bit earlier, and we asked the public about what are the options that we can take. And I think a lot of customers, they opted for choosing gas, which has less emission. That was a great story about how there was a case of all of society putting in their choice and their preference, but then it was great that they went beyond just the price. It was really the social impact of those. I think the fact that source is around the world, there is still a lot of coal around the world, and it would be fantastic if you can switch to renewable right away. But don't forget that renewable, it requires a lot of space, but it's also quite intermittent as well. So you still need something which is much more stable and has a stable base load. For example, in Hong Kong, in CLP, around 20%, if I remember correctly, comes from nuclear, which comes from China into CLP. That's an example.
Yeah, nuclear is also very controversial, right?
It is.
In one hand, it seems it's very sustainable when nothing happens. But if something happens, it's a big damage.
That's right, and it goes back to the complexity of this.
Yeah.
So there is no quick win of transition to this, which is why we always believe there is the case of, can you use alternatives? And there is that complex discussion which we touched on. Can you reduce? And if you can't reduce, can you use offsets? So that's why we think about it in this kind of framework. And we try and make the right choice for each of those different scenarios. And that's why, we started this conversation about smart buildings and how we try and say, well, let's just use what we need.
Yeah.
Because if everyone needs all of this energy, it needs to come from somewhere, and it needs to make economical sense for everyone.
Good. So it's nearly going to the end of our show. So in the end, I want perhaps to share one sentence to our audience about how to don't waste the crisis. Okay.
One sentence. I think the one sentence that I always think about is, don't just think about today, think about tomorrow and beyond. So I think the crisis has really focused us on coming up with quick solutions to address whatever the needs are. Managing environments remotely, quickly setting up remote Zoom lessons so we can communicate. But what do you do beyond that? The world, as everyone says, like this is slogan that everyone throws around saying this is a new norm. Okay, if this is a new norm, then how do we prepare for that? How do we go and structure ourselves to do that? Which is why I think don't just think about quick solutions for today. Think much, much longer term. And it goes back to what I was saying about one of our principles in CLP, which is always think about long term.
Yeah, so sustainability.
Exactly, sustainability.
Yeah. So thanks, Pops. I'm going to make some preview about next week. Our guest is the co-founder and CEO of Sleep. But how to spell Sleep is S-L-E-E-E-P. So they are providing a solution for people to have a quality of sleeping. Yeah, thank you very much. See you next week.